Welcome everyone to this virtual meeting of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee of Dorset Council on the 1st of the 12th, 2020. Welcome to any members of the public watching this meeting. For the benefit of the public, I am Councillor Shane Bartlett, Chairman of the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has had to put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making process to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and council staff in accordance with the government's guidance on social distancing by applying new regulations issued by government for holding meetings from remote locations. This meeting is being live streamed to the public and recorded both by audio and video. Public participation will take the form of written questions as opposed to public speaking. Please can I remind all councillors to ensure that their mobile phones are switched to silent during the meeting and the video screens are off and the microphones are switched to mute until such time as they are called to speak. For the benefit of the public, I will now take a roll call to establish which councillors of the committee are present. Councillor Andy Canning, Vice Chairman.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Rod Atkins.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Parks.
Morning, Chairman. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Roberts.
Present and correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Maria Rowe.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor David Shortell.
Good morning, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor David Took.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bill Trite. Okay. And the officers present.
Chairman.
Yes.
This is Councillor Brian Heatley. I'm here too.
I beg your pardon, Brian. Terribly sorry. And for the information for those attending, officers present will be John Selgren, Executive Director of Place, Jonathan Mayer, Corporate Director, Legal and Democratic Monitoring Officer, Lindsay Watson, Senior Democratic Service Officer, and Lee Johnson, producer for the meeting. Other officers will make themselves known when delivering reports or invited to speak. So if I can move to item 1, Lindsay, apologies, please.
Chairman, I've received no apologies for absence.
Thank you. Item 2, the minutes for the meeting of the 29th September 2020. So could I ask, are we all in agreement that the minutes are a correct record? If there's no dissent, I will take them as a correct record.
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any member have a declaration of interest that you wish to declare at this point? No? Okay. If anybody does have a declaration of interest, if they could announce that at the time in the meeting, please. Item 4, public participation. And I believe we have at least one letter to be read.
Okay, Chairman, we have received a letter from the Dorchester Chamber for Business, and I will read it out. It's with regards to proposed changes to car parking charges in Dorchester. It's from Peter Greenaway, President of the Dorchester Chamber for Business. Okay. I am writing as President of the Dorchester Chamber for Business to express concern on behalf of our membership at the proposed change to car parking charges, particularly the proposal to charge after 6 p.m. and on Sunday. We have been working hard with the Dorchester Town Council and Dorchester BID to assist our retail and hospitality members who have seen their businesses struggling by the impact of the COVID pandemic. With the hope of a vaccine soon, we are working with them to try to increase footfall in the high street for retailers, cafes, restaurants and pubs who have had such a difficult year. Whilst we realise that at some point parking charges will need to increase and charging structures may need to change, we firmly believe that now is not the right time to be doing that. As the vaccines take effect and the pandemic eases, hopefully next year, we need to be attracting as many people to return the town centre as possible. There are already plans being formulated to facilitate that, but we do not need any form of friction to discourage people from visiting the town, be they residents or visitors to the area. Thanks for your time. And that's from Peter Greenaway, President of Dorchester Chamber for Business.
Thank you, Lindsay. So, as I say, moving on to item 5, agenda item 5, parking services phase 1 project report. We will deal only with what's in the report, members, and not about the comms message that went out, which has already been dealt with, and also officer delegation, which isn't for a discussion within this, but is something that could be brought to Councillor Hall's governance and audit committee if there is a felt need to by members. So if I move to parking services phase 1 project report, and I think it's Mr. John Selgren to report on this.
Thank you, Chairman. John Selgren, Executive Director for Place. If I may, I hope the report speaks for itself and is clear. This is a report that's on its route to Cabinet, but the Scrutiny Committee is asked to review it before that, so that any recommendations that you wish to attach that can be reported through and considered by Cabinet members when this report is discussed by them. So if I may, Chairman, just to set a little bit of context, in a typical year, and of course this year isn't a typical year, hasn't been a typical year, but in a typical year, the level of income from parking for Dorset Council is around about £10 million. And that's split between a number of areas where charges are made for car parking. 10% of that income comes from the off-street parking service, 10% from the on-street car parking service, 80% from the off-street service, and a further 10% from penalty charge notices. This report is largely about seeking to make the car parking policy consistent across the Dorset Council area. In coming together on the 1st of April last year, Dorset Council drew together a number of predecessor authorities, each of whom had their own policies and tariffs in respect of car parking. And this report and that which will follow are intended to give consistency across the piece, recognising that Dorset Council as a single unitary authority needs to have a consistent approach across the geographical area. The other important thing, I think, Chairman, to draw members and those viewing this meeting is to be clear about the income from car parking services and where that goes. So the revenue for providing the Dorset Council highway service, which includes parking, is a net figure of around £21.9 million. And the provisions that exist within the Road Traffic Regulations Act, specifically section 55, ring fences income from parking to be spent on a range of specific things. And those are for, specifically, off-street parking accommodation. That's classic statutory speak. That to you and I is the cost of maintaining car parks. These things aren't without cost to council to run. They need to be resurfaced. They're subject to business rates. They need to be lined. We need a wardening service. We need to operate ticketing machines and so on. So that provision in the Act gives us the ability to make those charges and to recover those costs back into the service. The second area that income can be used for is for public passenger transport services. And the third area, importantly, is highway improvements. That's the maintenance of the highway facility itself. So all of the current income from parking is reinvested into the highway service. And that service also has income streams from direct external income, some of those directly from government itself. But that still leaves about £3.6 million of net income, which needs to come from other sources. Much of that is derived from the Dorset Council's council tax yield. So in summary, Chairman, what I would seek to describe is that the car parking service is funded from, or the highway service is funded from a range of sources. And specifically, the members need to be aware that there are statutory provisions which do ring fence the income from car parking to go back into the highway service. If I may now just turn to and summarise the proposals, this that's in the report before you this morning is phase 1 of a set of proposals, which, as I said at the outset, are designed to ensure fair and consistent charging and policies across the Dorset Council area. The specific proposals in this phase are proposing that off-street charges at long stay car parks in Lyme Regis and West Bay are increased from £2 to £4 for all day parking, as they're significantly lower than comparable parts of the Dorset Council area. So again, that speaks back to the point about consistency I spoke of earlier. The paper also proposes that charges are applied on Sundays and again in a consistent manner across the Dorset Council area. In some cases, we have areas where charges are applied on a Sunday, in other cases they're not. And this report therefore seeks to bring consistency to that approach by applying a car park charge for Sunday services across the Dorset Council area. And the second area of consistency in relation to timing of the car park service charges relate to the evening charge. And again, there's an inconsistency, Chairman, here between the policies that Dorset Council has inherited from predecessor authorities. So the proposal is to align all of the evening charges to apply until 8 o'clock in the evening in all parts of the Dorset Council area. As I said in the earlier parts of these introductory comments, this is a review that is taking place in 2 parts, of which this is the first. A separate report will come forward on the stage 2 proposals, but as I say, Chairman, that's not the subject of discussion for this morning. This morning we're focusing on the paper that's before the committee and those 2 specific options to look at ensuring there's consistency in the charging across the piece and in consistency in the application of the hours policy. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Okay. Did the portfolio holder wish to speak, or can I move on to speak to the members? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. At the outset, all I'm going to say is this covers 2 areas. One is obviously harmonisation, but the other is to address a revenue shortfall that has been growing, and unfortunately COVID-19 has not helped us on this at all. Members will be aware that we gave a substantial period of free parking during the early stages of COVID-19, which has left me with a rather large black hole that I need to address. But this is looking towards the future, very much towards the future. We harmonised on council tax. We need to harmonise on all our other charges, certainly those in my portfolio. And as John has already pointed out, there is a much bigger programme going on that members will be fully involved with as we go forward. This is an operational decision as much as anything else, and I'm going to be very happy to answer questions from members if required. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would the lead member like to speak as well?
Sorry, I couldn't get that. No, I've supported. Obviously, we've worked with councillors on this, and I've supported Councillor Bryant's stance. And the only other thing to say is that the revenue budget that we're wanting to get the money into also covers the winter maintenance budget. So we do need to get some income in. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Was there a second lead member here as well?
Hi Shane, yeah, this is Councillor Lacey Clark. I am absolutely here. However, as the lead member split, car parking falls solely under Cherry Brooks. I'm lead member for highways, the harbours, travel and the environment. I do apologise, I wasn't expecting to be called in. However, I have gone through this as well and had input with Councillor Bryant, and this seems very much to be something we should support and is just bringing everything in line together and much needed.
Okay, thank you, Lacey Clark. Okay, members, before I move to the debate, I've got 2 members outside of the committee that wish to speak. So if I come to Councillor Molly Rennie first.
Thank you very much, Shane, and hello to everybody. I'd like to speak not as a Dorchester, sorry, I represent Dorchester East Ward. I'd like to speak, though, not as a ward member. I've already sent my comments that way. I'm the council's representative to Dorchester Bid as an observer and there to support and help them in any way. I'm very pleased to see and hear this morning you've had a letter from Peter Greenaway explaining their position. I'd like to speak to 1.3, the public response. I think that while it's really good, we've got a lot of response so far, and I'm very much aware that the agenda and the minutes have to be sent out in advance of the meeting. This is just a snapshot of the comments. John Selgren mentioned this is not a typical year, and of course it's not a typical year, and the organisations such as the Bid were not able to come together to discuss their comments until last week when they had their meeting. I am aware many members have written in, and in fact I've been copied into some, and in fact the director for the bid actually wrote in October to the officers, so I'm surprised that their comments are not within the appendices. The bid, along with the Chamber, are very much aware of the situation of the council and the dilemma that they found themselves in. They also are very appreciative and supportive of all of the work that the council and the government have done to help the businesses here in Dorchester. They, in their emails and letters, they have actually openly suggested, as well as understanding, altering the timing in the new year, suggested different methods of payment, different ways of working with this. But their biggest issue is that you are talking about bringing this in without delay.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Can I come back to Mr. Selgren? Do you have a comment to make on that?
I didn't want to add anything at this moment, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So if I can move to Councillor Ireland, who I believe wants to speak.
I do, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm just going to go through the paper if I may, in a few minutes, not line by line, but in order if I can. I don't recall back in the shadow days that the Section 151 officer, mentioned this very much. And if you requested a paper on parking convergence, that's what it was. It was convergence, and it was a paper. So I don't recall any decision being taken, and I don't recall any paper being presented to any of the authority, like the shadow cabinet executive. So if that paper existed and the work was done, I don't really understand why this paper is so sparse. Actually, it's possibly one of the worst papers I've actually seen as the councillor. It's so lacking information that you couldn't make it up. If I move on to the recommendations, we get this notion of there's some inequitability in all our parking, and the fact that convergence is good. I, as a councillor, haven't been inundated by complaints of my constituency saying it's really unfair that I'm paying more for parking in Weymouth than I would park for Dorchester. That doesn't exist. So this notion of inequitability is out there, but there is no proof that it actually matters. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. All our towns are different. Lyme Regis is different from Bedminster, it's different from Bridport, it's different from Shaftesbury. And this notion, which isn't supported at all anywhere, that there are one-size-fits-all solution is suitable or actually desired, is not explained. This notion of equity is just a complete nonsense. And it also mentions that early free parking in Purbeck is possibly a legacy from which, because Purbeck residents shop early to avoid the tourists. So it doesn't actually examine whether that is actually true. It does say it could be true in other areas, but if so, why is that a bad thing? Maybe we should be encouraging people to shop outside the peak period. Maybe we should encourage people in Weymouth to shop at 9 o'clock in the morning instead of noon. Why is that a bad thing? Maybe all areas should start at 10 o'clock. This isn't examined at all. Recommendation C, it goes on about parity and consistency again. Sunday charging. So it doesn't say why is this a good thing. Why should you charge people, for instance, in Dorchester, to go to the churches there? And yet Weymouth is charged, but that's for the tourists in the summer. Everywhere is different, and it's just not explored or justified in this paper. Recommendation D, it says we should be aligning with our neighbouring local authorities. Why? Again, it's not explained why we should be doing that. It's just nonsense. And it's clear, if you look at Dorchester, for example, I'm just picking one town, I don't represent that area, but it's been clear it's been dying on its arse for a couple of years already, and it's got worse. You walk down any of the arcades, more than half of the shops are closed. You walk down the high street, pretty soon half the shops will close. And extending evening charges will hit those businesses who are trying to survive, the pubs, the restaurants, when they're open, and they need exactly our support right now because of the situation we're under. And extending those times is just wrong. And looking back, I think Weymouth used to park for later, and then they moved it backwards. And looking at the car park in East Street, It used to be empty between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Now it's full. And why? Because people are coming in and parking and spending money in the town. And both of these recommendations, C and D, they state research and impact analysis will be done after the fact. Realistically, who does that? What way? You know, it makes no sense. If you're going to make a decision, it should be informed. It should be driven by, evidence. It should be proven that it's a good thing. You don't go and do it after the fact to try and change the figures to suit your narrative. And we're told it's a first step convergence, and it uses that word which is meaningless and it's not explained here. Enabling future transformation. What is that? The paper doesn't say what that transformation is. It doesn't say it's a good thing. Why should transformation be a good thing? Transformation in businesses quite often means you sack a load of people. That's not good. And we have no evidence to say the transformation is good. And public responses, they're next to nothing because make no odds. That's no surprise because there wasn't any consultation. And finally, climate implications. And this is where I'd probably change tack. It says essentially that the impact of this is either even or probably negative if people start driving around looking for parking spaces. If we were really addressing climate change and the impact it has on the environment and the impact that driving around in internal combustion engines has on our environment, then we should actually make proper changes. This paper should be proposing that our parking charges go through the roof. It should be proposing that if you're going to drive somewhere, you turn around and think, do I really want to do that? Am I going to drive 5 minutes into Dorchester when I could cycle? Am I going to go from Weymouth to Dorchester across the Ridgeway when actually I could catch the bus? Because the alternative is spending 20 quid for parking for 5 hours. People wouldn't do that. If we want to change people's behaviour, we should be doing things properly. And we should be, in a proper parking paper, examining those things, not jumping ahead. And let's face it, the reason we're here today talking about this is because we're short of money. And that isn't a good enough reason to go ahead and do the changes which are being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. And I think a lot of the points that you've made, I think, will come out in the debate with the members on the committee.
Mr. Chairman, it's Andy Canning here. That was Molly Rennie just on the call because she hadn't quite finished her statement. And she was cut off because she's lost the internet connection and she hasn't been able to get back on again since then. But I think you got the gist of what her points were in terms of businesses, and I think there are references in the appendices which support what she's saying in terms of the need that businesses have to be supported.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Canning. I hadn't realised she'd actually lost internet connection. I thought she'd finished her statement. Thank you for that. Okay, members, I'll open up the debate to the committee now.
Sorry, I think this is Councillor Stella Jones has also requested to speak, who's not a committee member.
Beg your pardon, thank you. Councillor Jones?
Yeah, I think at the moment, the biggest message we're getting from everyone, from the government, in fact, from all over the world, is how we need to build up our economy. And Dorset, we need to build our economy. We need to build our economy in all our towns and villages. And so this is completely the wrong time to start changing our car parking. We've got to build up our local businesses, and local businesses need people to come in and trade in towns. Dorchester especially has had a double hit. We've had COVID like everybody else, which has meant shops have no customers, but we've also lost all the workers who are now working from home. And in Dorchester, that is a very big issue, because we have obviously a lot of council workers usually work in Dorchester. So shops have been hit twice. It's just the wrong time altogether. We've got to build up our town, we've got to build up our economy. And I please defer this until we've got COVID out of the way.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. So if I can now move to the committee to debate this, I've got Councillor Took to speak first. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ireland made a lot of the points I was going to make for me, so I won't go over everything that he said. I would challenge a couple of things in the report. Firstly, they talk about at reason D, which is just on top of page 14. It says that extending evening charges across Dorset Council area aligns Dorset Council with neighbouring local authorities. Half an hour on Google shows that's not actually the case. New Forest District Council is almost always 8 to 6, although Tottenham Civic Centre is free for up to 20 hours. Wiltshire is generally 8 to 6, some are only 8 to 3. South Somerset is mostly 8 to 6, some are longer, a few are all day charging, but frequently allow the first 2 hours free. East Devon is typically 8 to 6, and prices are generally £1 an hour, but there's a winter offer of £2 all day. So there's lots of variety in these neighbouring authorities in terms not only of charging but of times. And the basic question comes down to, why is it imperative, other than for ideological reasons, why is it imperative that Dorset, a county with many different communities and needs, must have a unified parking scheme which ignores those differences? Why do we not have a variation and variety which suits local needs? And one example might be the objection from Sturminster Newton regarding the school run, where they found it very useful to delay till after 9 o'clock any charges for parking. So I simply think this is something that is being pushed on as a matter of ideology, that this idea of everything's got to be unified across the county is a chimera. It's not true. As Councillor Ireland said, there's no particular demand for it from residents, and it serves no particularly good purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. And I think a lot of the problem we've got, I think, is the predecessor councils all dealt with car parking differently. There will be a lot of work to do in phase 2 in terms of the consultation process and what needs to be done, which I speak with some knowledge about, because on the Task and Finish group in the former East Dorset District Council that went through a similar process to this, and that is where there is a lot of work, where a lot of controversy will come about, and it is a far bigger piece of work than people can possibly imagine when you start delving down into it. Before I bring Councillor Maria Rowe in, I want to go back to Councillor Rennie, who I hadn't realised had actually lost connection. She's now back in the meeting. So, Councillor Rennie, did you want to finish the statement you were making?
Thank you. I don't know actually when I dropped out, and I couldn't even get back in on my own computer. But really, where I'm going with this is the Dorchester bid feels you actually just said the word consultation. We're not able to take part in any consultation. As I said, John talked about this is not a typical year. The time scale was so poor, and the organisations would not have, let alone the town and the parish councils, not even have had the opportunity to have a meeting to give a view of all of the members rather than each individual person right in. They wanted to work with the council, and they have worked, and they want to continue to, and they do agree that we have to have some income, but the timing is just absolutely dreadful. Without delay, has not given any time for consultation, and had not given any time for them to take part in a meaningful conversation with anybody about it, let alone the officers here at the council. Government has asked for shops to stay open longer, and we're putting the car parking prices up. Everybody who owns a business is well aware that the cost of car parking is low. It's not high when you look at the spend indeed, but it is the perception that we are not encouraging the businesses and the traders here within the town. And I'm only speaking about Dorchester because I'm representing the bid here, and that, no, I'm not. I'm our member on the bid board. So I can't speak for anybody else, but the fact that they've not been included and their response has not been taken care of, and we've talked about media, social media, but we've not looked at the town's websites and the bid and the chamber's websites. We've only looked at our own. I think so many people were quite shocked to begin with that they didn't even take any notice of writing in. And bear in mind, it's not normal times. Not everybody actually is up with what the council's doing at the moment. They don't all get an Echo or a local paper. I lost my thread anyway, but I think I've actually covered everything I wanted to say, and thanks, Shane, for letting me come back.
That's fine. Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Your points were well made. Thank you. Okay. If I can move now to Councillor Maria Rowe.
Good morning, everybody. Many people have contacted me across different wards in Dorset, some with extremely creative, imaginative ideas for ways that we can move forward. But the overwhelming concern is about the fragility of the nighttime economy, and their voices have not been heard. And they are not included in the percentage of comments that Dorset Council has collected. So I think it's really important for me to raise that point. And I'd like to know what percentage of the population would be representative and could be used to reflect the views of Dorset residents.
Thank you, Councillor Maria Rowe. Would either the officer or the portfolio holder like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think Chairman John Selgren, if it helps, I mean, quite rightly, as the report records, we did go out to town and parish councils, but as we know, the first tier of local government is representative of those communities, and we certainly hope that they would reflect that in the comments that have come back to us. It has been helpful indeed to receive some of the other comments, albeit quite late in the day, but from the discussion this morning. So I think what we have sought to do is to consult it as widely as possible and to take those views. But I do accept that they're still coming in, and there's no reason, Chairman, why those can't be taken on board and reported in as part of the report going forward to Cabinet.
Can I just come back, please? I still don't understand what percentage would be taken as representative. When does Dorset Council consider that enough people have written in for it to be, you know, a reflection of Dorset?
In the days when I used to teach statistical methods, the statistically correct answer to that is it's 30 are required for a sample.
30.
But I can gauge, yes, I can gauge from your response that that might not be considered enough, but certainly that would be statistically representative. I think in terms of the comments that we've had, particularly on social media, we've got numbers up considerably higher than that number. So, you know, from a statistical point of view, I think we could regard this as having a degree of rigour about it, albeit, and I think the point was well made in the comments that were made earlier, social media doesn't necessarily encompass the entire population. So I think what we've seen is written submissions, particularly coming in through the town and parish councils, and then wider comments coming in through social and other media.
Excuse me, Chair, I've got one other question.
Certainly.
This is about the climate implications. My question is about the recommendation A and B, possibly supporting the climate as the public may be persuaded to use green transport. This is a good aspiration and I support it. However, people need to be offered good, reliable and cheap public transport as a viable alternative. And I looked up travelling from Wimborne to Dorchester by public transport, which is a journey of approximately 32 miles. It takes me about 35 minutes in the car, and it would cost me £28.40 because I would have to go to Poole on the bus, and then I'd have to get a train, and it would take me an hour and 40 minutes. So I really think that until people are offered viable alternatives, that you know, that they're not going to be persuaded. And I wondered, in the research that is mentioned, has a study taken place in Dorset to show that the public may be persuaded to use green transport rather than using their vehicles for paying for parking? Has that research taken place in Dorset?
Mr. Selgren?
Chairman, you want to respond to that? So we are reviewing the transport policies and are conducting that research as we speak, and that will go on. The other one, Chairman, I would remark on is the comments that I made earlier in the introductory comments that income from parking is ploughed back into the highway service. It is specific under statute, ring fence for that purpose. But I think as Councillor Rowe has pointed out, therein in a sense lies the conundrum. So what we're seeking to do is make sure we are investing in public transport and indeed a number of other alternative sustainable ways of getting from place to place. But as ever, that's a good example of sort of supply and demand, where actually we do need to make sure that those facilities are there. So the continued investment into that, derived in part from car parking income, is a key part to doing that, and that will, that's a long-term part of the council's strategy to shift our residents and our visitors towards more sustainable transport options.
If I could just very briefly come back on that, I don't think it's a good enough argument to say that raising car park charges is going to support the climate. I just don't think that's a good argument.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rowe, and I would agree with you that in terms of a integrated public transport system, we're woefully inadequate in that, not just in Dorset, but I think in large areas of the country there isn't an integrated public transport system, which, as you rightly say, residents then don't feel the need to use it because the alternative from using their car just really isn't up to the specification that it should be. I've now got Councillor David Shortell to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've taken on board comments made by John Selgrave and the portfolio Ray Bryan, and I understand that in fact the revenue from car parking charges will be reinvested back into highways, and I appreciate that, and that perhaps is a good objective. My concerns are two, really. First of all, of course, timing. The biggest negativity expressed from members of those who have been consulted is the impact on local businesses, and particularly at this particular point in time. We're in the middle of a really concerning pandemic, and we're hearing all the time on the news that in fact the major retail outlets are closing down because of lack of business, and yet we're trying to promote those businesses, support them throughout the rest of this period of concern. But we're not doing that by imposing car parking charges to prevent people from parking and doing their shopping there. And and surely this can be addressed after the pandemic is over and dealt with. And my other concern was the fact that the uniformity of charges, because of course we're charging visitors when they're visiting perhaps the coastlines in Weymouth and Lyme Regis, etc., where they're out for the day and enjoying the sunshine and the beaches and what have you. We're making a charge to them, and that's fine, they have to pay for the enjoyment of being there. But we're imposing the same charges on those people who are actually doing shopping in the centre of Dorchester or the other major towns. And so uniformity perhaps it needs to be looked at again, because of course, it's imposing the same charges throughout the entire county isn't always advantageous to both businesses and members of the public. I have concern about this, Chairman, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell, and I don't think you're alone in those concerns. I think that, and I'm going to ask the...
I might, it's John Selgrave again. Councillor Shortell actually makes a very good point. The point about the shopper's permit, which is something that's existed again in parts of Dorset, but not across the entire new Dorset Council patch, is something that's part of the Phase 2 proposals. So there will be the opportunity for members to consider and discuss that when the Phase 2, Stage 2 proposals come forward.
Thank you. Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, the phase 2 of this, with the consultation exercise that goes on, is a far more difficult process and opens up a whole can of worms when we actually get into that. Well, I was going to invite you to speak, Mr. Selgren, and the portfolio holder, to address perhaps the budget shortfalls that you have within highways and the need for you raising these car park charges at this time, so that service provision isn't cut during the winter months in terms of the potholes and the critting and the gully clearing. I don't know if you want to say something about that now. We're trying to weigh up and balance a need for the council to fulfil its statutory responsibilities and its road maintenance and its health and safety issues it will have over the coming winter months with its highways, and also obviously to try and support the businesses within the high street. And it's a very difficult balance to try and bring about. So did you wish to say something about that at this point?
Yeah, can I cut in on that, please, Chairman? Because
Certainly.
Obviously it's something that I feel quite passionate about, as we've seen passion from other members this morning. We've got circa a 3 million hole in the finances, and as a responsible portfolio holder, my job is to make sure that we try and come within our budget. That's not easy in the current circumstances, to say the least. Can I also remind members that during the pandemic, we've had a long period where I suspended all charges to enable people who were locked in their houses to have somewhere to park their cars due to the limited parking space that was available at their houses. And Chairman, you will know, after a walk you and I had round Wimborne a few years ago, where you quite rightfully pointed out that there was a lack of facility for residents to park. Well, I took that on and rightfully or wrongfully decided that we would make the car parks free during that period. And I think that is something that we're tending to forget. We had a long period where there was no charges. In addition to that, members will also remember, hopefully, that we took the stage of, for instance, in Weymouth, where we went with a pedestrianised area to help the businesses so they could overflow onto the streets. This again has cost us a revenue, but it's also cost us money in putting these facilities together. I was interested in the word ideology, because there's no ideology on this. This is down to basic common sense. We have to find the money to afford what we really want to have. And certainly my feelings are that the residents will not forgive us if we allow the roads to deteriorate, bearing in mind we're going to a very we're going into a period where the maintenance of the roads becomes absolutely critical because of the ice and the frost and everything else that we have to deal with, which damages the road more than anything. I think it's also very important that members realise that because this money is ring-fenced, it helps us pay for the increased subsidies we're having to put into public transport. The government have given us some money, but that doesn't cover it all. I've faced in the last few months decisions on particular bus routes where the bus operator has decided to cease the bus route. Well, the only way we could keep that bus route going was by giving it a subsidy. And these are the sorts of areas where the money outgoing has increased quite dramatically. I think it's also worth pointing out, because a point was raised on the fact that we're not in line with other areas as far as night charging is concerned. One of the most successful night areas, and people will hopefully forgive me for this, is actually Bournemouth nightlife. And if you want to charge, if you want to park in Bournemouth for the evening, it'll cost you £8 for the evening. So again, when we talk about our neighbours, these are the sort of information that we took on board when looking at this. I really am concerned at this perception that we're not trying to help businesses. We are. We've gone way above the levels. And can I remind people that the bids also have the facility, if they so desire, to say to me, we would like this to be free or whatever, and we will contribute towards those costs. We have always had an open format with the bids. We informed the town and parish councils of what we were doing, and the responses we had from the town and parish councils were fairly limited, to say the least. The job I face is trying to balance the books. It's quite right. We have a winter period coming up where the costs will be quite high. If I really want to balance the books, then I will have to look at starting to how we can do that in different ways. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop spending money to make sure the highways are safe. Far from it. So please don't anybody think that we're going to do anything that is detrimental to the safety of the residents of this area. But I think I'm perfectly prepared to sit and discuss with anybody, as I am with this meeting, why we are doing these things. As I say, we did quite a lot of work on looking at the charges, and if I just take Lyme Regis, and I know it's a subject that has caused a certain amount of concern, £2 a day. Phase 2 will come up with some different ideas, but we're not discussing phase 2. We're discussing phase 1, which is the interim of what we need to do. And I think the recommendations that are out there have actually been well thought out. There's a lot of work gone into them, and I thank the officers for all the work they put into this. And I'll stop now, and I'll take any further questions at a later date. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Selgren, do you want to quickly add anything?
Chairman, nothing to add at this stage, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think Mr. Mayor might do, if I might, Chairman.
Sorry?
I think Mr. Mayor might want to.
Yeah, I'm just supposed to go to Mr. Mayor, Monitoring Officer. Jonathan, I believe you wish to speak.
Chairman, thank you very much. Members will know that part of my role as monitoring officer is about keeping you on the straight and narrow, ensuring that the council is always operating within and through the law. So I just need to give a little bit of clarification about charging and what the council can do in terms of charging for car parking lawfully. So Mr. Selgren has explained what we do with the income from car parking, both our off-street and our on-street car parking income, how it supports how as a council we manage traffic, how we invest in car parks, and how any surpluses that are made are ploughed back into public transport and the road network in a sort of coordinated way. But what I need to be clear about is that we cannot use car parking charging as a straightforward money-making, revenue-raising measure. That's what council tax is for. And the law doesn't enable us simply to say, let's increase car parking charges to make money. It's the primary motivation has to be about managing traffic effectively and supporting the services that we provide that are connected with that. If incidentally, from managing traffic effectively, money is made and that can be invested effectively to support communities and how they travel, that's great, but it mustn't be the primary motivation to make money.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. If I can now move to...
I think it's me, Chairman.
Yeah, it's Councillor Roberts. I'm sorry for the delay, Councillor Roberts.
No, that's quite all right. It was very interesting. One or two points have almost been covered by Councillor Bryan and John Selgren, but a couple of observations. I think it's disingenuous for colleagues to have compared Dorset's original car parking differentials with whole other authorities. There is no comparison to see if they had differential car parking within those authorities. It is much more benchmarking to compare the whole of Dorset with the whole of another authority. That's one point. Secondly, John Selgren touched on residents parking. An awful lot of this increase will be paid by visitors if we take advantage of a sensible residents parking scheme, which we've had in Bridport for many years. But my most important point, not a single person who wants to delay or not increase parking charges has come up with any option for increasing the budget of the council. They do not just represent their areas and their car parking or their shops. They represent every adult who needs social care, every child who needs care. And I think as chairman, perhaps you could say, what is your alternative for raising that missing income? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I'll take that on board.
I thought you might, yes.
Being impartial and trying to chair the meeting, yeah. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. I broadly support this paper. I think the revenue point is important for all the reasons that Councillor Bryan so eloquently set out. And I mean, we have generously done quite a lot of things in the earlier stages of the pandemic. Moreover, it is the case that council tax money is going into highways matters. So if we do increase the amount that we get from parking, that council tax money becomes available for other things. So I think that fits within the lines that Mr. Mayor was describing, but it does have an important effect on revenues overall. Consistency. I come from Weymouth, and I think maybe we look at the issue of consistency slightly differently, because on the whole, our charges in Weymouth are higher than the charges throughout most of the rest of the county. It's not an issue that has featured particularly in any representations to me or my colleagues, as far as I know. And I think that people in Weymouth will feel that it's entirely fair for people elsewhere in Dorset to pay the same sort of amounts. And if the result is that a bit of the council tax money can go to other things, well, that's a good thing. So I don't think this is ideology. I think it's fairness, and it's where I come to from this. Moving on, parking charges are but a tiny part of the money that is needed to run and buy a car. It's a very small proportion. I think that the extent to which that people are saying people are going to be deterred from going to our town centres because of the parking charges has been massively exaggerated. Yes, it makes a bit of difference, obviously, but particularly in the context of the pandemic, the things that are keeping people away from our shops are the fear of mixing with other people, the fact that a lot of the shops are shut, the general features of the pandemic. It's not the car parking charges, and I do think that this element of it has been considerably exaggerated. Can I move on to the last point, which was raised by Councillor Ireland? These increases are not enough to make the climate changes that I in particular would like to see. I'd like to see far less people going to town in cars and using active travel more and using public transport more. And there needs to be the public transport to do that, as Councillor Rowe pointed out. But I suppose what worries me slightly about this is that if the council balks at this rather minor change in parking charges, given the opposition it has created, what is the chance that in phase 2, we begin to make the fundamental changes that are needed to meet the climate change agenda? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. You made some very good points there, which I would agree with. I'm going to come to Councillor Canning next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just want to comment on a few things that have already come up in the debate so far. In terms of the public responses, I have to say This is definitely one of the larger issues that I've seen as a councillor. It has really angered and really annoyed considerably large number of businesses in Dorchester and the surrounding areas. And I think that the appendices that are attached to the report clearly shows the strength of feeling that there is in the business community against these proposals. Also the strength of feeling amongst the town and parish councils that responded to consultation. Bear in mind, they weren't actually asked their opinion about this. They were only asked their opinion about the shopper's permit. So for them to go out of their way to make other comments about the more general problems with car parking is a sign of how strongly they feel about it. We ran a poll online and got about 1,600 responses, just people online. I have to say that if we'd been able to go on the streets and speak to people while they were shopping, that sort of thing, if COVID wasn't around, I'm sure the numbers of people responding would have been 2 or 3 times that sort of number. But still, 1,600 people just online is still a very reasonable response for the Dorset Council area. I think what's very clear is the businesses feel that the timing for this is just completely wrong. That it sends out completely the wrong message. That in the middle of a pandemic, when businesses are absolutely struggling for every penny and for survival, that we would look to make money out of people wanting to use their services, and it is just totally wrong at this time. In contrast to what Mark Roberts has said, though, I don't have a problem with raising the sort of money you're talking about here, £800,000 or even up to £1 million. I don't have a problem with setting that as a target, but I think it has to be done in the round. It has to be done holistically. This idea of doing a bit of it now and a bit of it later is going to cause a lot of problems, and it is being rushed unnecessarily. And let's face it, while COVID is running like this, the car parks are going to be empty. We do actually have the time to deal with this properly, because it's going to be quite some time before even the existing system that we get back to anything like full car parking. So I oppose this for one of the principal reasons is the effect it has on the businesses. I also think what hasn't been looked into is the effect it has on the car boot sales that are on Sundays in Dorchester and in Bridport, which are a considerable source of funding for voluntary organisations. Many members outside of Bridport and Dorset might not be aware of that, but profits that are made from both of those two events go and support a lot of community groups. And if that money wasn't there because they were charging them to use the sites, then potentially those community groups have nowhere else to go for their funding except to the council, which is obviously not going to get them very far. So I have real problems with that as well. But I think the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues as well, is just that I just don't believe that you'll get the money for this. I think it's fantasy. If you put car parking charges in Dorchester up to 8 p.m, I guarantee you the first thing that will happen is simply people will, some people will actually go out shopping later or out to the restaurant later. So instead of meeting at 7:30 with their friends, they'll meet at 8 o'clock to avoid the charge. So all you've done is you just change the hours of the customers a bit. But in other places, what they will do is they will go and park in residential streets that are full already. And we all know this from our towns, that many central areas in our towns struggle to find parking, and they struggle to find it at any time of the day. If you put in charges up to 8 p.m, what happens then is it just makes it virtually impossible when people come home from work for them to find anywhere to park anywhere near where they live. And it is a real source of anger and concern amongst residents that this is the case. Now, the normal solution to this is residents parking. But the residents' parking schemes themselves stop at 6 o'clock and don't operate on Sundays. So again, you are enabling people to park for free right next door to where the car parks are, and they will take advantage of that. People will go and park on residential streets and annoy the residents who live there by filling it all up. And particularly residents' parking areas will feel very annoyed because they're paying their annual fee and then finding that the spaces aren't there at various key times of the day or week, because people are using it. So I have to say, I think I do quite understand, and I have a lot of sympathy for the black hole in our finances, and we must do something about it. But I think we've got to get this right and do it properly. And that means a proper investigation of parking, a holistic and complete proper investigation of parking, both on-street parking and off-street parking. And I'm quite happy to accept that we set ourselves a target of £800,000 or £1 million or something like that we need to save. I don't take Robert's point that this is just an attempt to stop us raising money. I think we all accept that we need more money, but we have to go and look at it in the round. In effect, it has on every part of our community before we actually make final decisions. And so my strong belief is what we should be saying to Cabinet is that the whole review should be done as one big review, give it to the overview committee. We've set up these new structures, let them work properly. Let the overview committee get on with the job of looking into this for the whole council area, and let them come back with a fully worked out, balanced approach that will include all the recommendations for parking, on-street and off-street parking, all in one go. And by all means, as I said, set an ambitious target for how much money they've got to raise, but do it properly and do it across the whole area, not in a piecemeal approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. No, I wouldn't disagree with much of you said, and I certainly have every sympathy in terms of the nighttime charging. Councillor David Tuke.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bryan challenged my use of the word ideology, and I wanted to respond to that, and there's a couple of other points to make as well. Saying that Dorset Council must have a unified approach to car parking is ideological because it simply ignores the huge differences that exist across the county. There are lots of different communities, lots of different needs, and to say that one size fits all parking is a thing we must do is an ideological approach. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow car parking to raise some required revenue. And I've got a question for Jonathan Mayer. His comment on not allowing it to be used as general revenue, I thought that applied to on-street, not off-street, but he's the expert on that. I'll bow to his knowledge. But Mark Roberts also suggested that why are we comparing with other neighbours? Well, the reason I raised that is because that was raised in the reasons for the recommendation. And our neighbours don't charge 8 to 8. They generally charge 8 to 6. So that I'm afraid is entirely relevant. But what I want to do is to say that unified charging is not necessarily the best way to actually raise revenue if that's what we're going to do. If you target areas, times, dates for charging as appropriate to the area, so that in summer in Bridport you might be able to charge more than you can in winter in Wimborne, and if you strategic use of the residents, it's been called shoppers permits. I think it should be residents permits, and I don't think those permits should be limited to certain times of day, but we'll come on to that in phase 2, I guess. But by being fairly clever about how you tweak the way you charge for car parks, then you can actually raise the revenue that you want to do, rather than have this blanket one size fits all approach, which I really don't think will work. And I think I agree with Councillor Canning. It needs to be put back to overview committee, who can sort through a proper policy, rather than have this what seems to be a very brief and not fully thought through phase 1. So I don't think I can support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tuke. And it's comments that will be fed back from this to the Cabinet Committee, obviously. So would Mr. Mayor like to comment about where the ability is to spend for the on-street and off-street car parking charges, just to clarify that for members?
Chairman, can I comment a little bit later? Thank you.
Certainly. So can I go to the portfolio holder, Councillor Ray Bryant?
Chairman. I couldn't let it go on a couple of points that have just been raised. I am very concerned at the term used, making money, that was used by Councillor Canning. This is not about making money. This is about trying to balance revenue. So can we just make sure that we understand exactly what is the purpose of this? And I'd also like to deal with the fact that there was mention made of car boots. There was no change to any of the car boot days, because all councils are given the opportunity to have so many free days themselves, which they allocate. And the last but not least point is that when I go out for a meal, I'm looking to spend probably £50–60 on a meal. £2 of car park is less than one of the drinks I would buy at the bar. So can we please make sure that we keep things in focus as far as reality is concerned, because I think that's important. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. I don't really want to get into the pedantics of quite how statements are made. I think Councillor Canning was just raising the issue about actually generating income within the council. I haven't spoken myself yet. In terms of the recommendations we've got before us, I don't have any disagreement with the increase of charges from £2 to £4 in Lyme Regis and West Bay, and I don't have an issue with increasing the hours in Purbeck to 8 AM, and I don't have a problem with the Sunday charging. Without wishing to be just talk about one's area has already been pointed out, we need to be talking about the whole of Dorset, but within my own town there is charging from 8 AM to 6 PM, which brings me to point D, which is the evening charges. I believe that all market towns, ancient historical market towns in Dorset, will have a problem with the evening charges. As Councillor Bryan alluded to earlier, when we did the task and finish group car park and review in the former East Dorset District Council, predecessor council, I took the leader of the council and Councillor Bryan for a walk around the old railway part of the town, Wimble Minster, because there is a significant problem there with on-street parking. This was an area of the town that was laid out during the golden age of the railway, much like many of our market towns increased in size during the golden age of the railway in the late 19th century, around 1880s. And when those areas were increased within those towns, more residential development come in, it was with no thought about a modern motor car. That wasn't even on anyone's horizon at that time. And of course, as time's moved on, we now have the modern motor car. We know that we have families with children living at home that are now at a point where they're out working themselves. It's already been alluded to within this committee, as we do not have an integrated public transport system. It's woefully inadequate, like various other parts of the country as well in Dorset. And therefore, it's not unusual to have a home where you have 1, 2, maybe even 3 adult children that are still living at home that all need a car themselves to be able to get to work, should those be fortunate to be in employment. And there is just nowhere to park these cars. And the only thing that is left for these individuals to do is to get a residence parking permit to park at night. Now, the point is that those that are fortunate to be in employment, when they travel back from the place of work, they roughly get back into their towns, let's say at 6 o'clock. They can drive straight into a car park and park the car and go back and pick it up at 8 o'clock the next morning. It doesn't impact upon their lives too severely. If they've got to come back into the town before the 8 PM deadline, if we increase that charging, then that's going to cause us a problem within those areas of towns that have got a inadequate supply of on-street parking. So that is my concern. It was my concern back when we did it in East Dorset District Council, and I would strongly recommend that Cabinet do not approve the increase in the evening charges to 8 PM. That I think will cause a significant issue and cause many of the market towns a real problem. For my part, in the debate we've had so far, as I say, I haven't heard any great argument against the point B for the Purbeck, the 8 AM, or the implementation of the Sunday parking. And that's as much as I've got to say on that at the moment. Councillor Canning would like to come back and speak. So, Councillor Canning.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on. I apologise if I badly phrased what I meant to say. I mean, I wasn't saying that we should be using money from car parking elsewhere. I accept the point that it should stay within the highways department and maybe used that way. My point is more about the car boots. Come back to that actually. The car boots a weekly event on a Sunday, so they're 50 a year. I think, if I remember correctly, the parish councils get the opportunity to have 5 or 7 days a year when they're allowed to make it free or something like that. I think. The problem is that the car boot sales are right next to well, they're actually in the car parks. So if you charge people to go and park there, then to go to at the moment, obviously, they can go and park there for free, and they can walk into the car boot and buy whatever they like. Most of that's fairly low-end items. They're not spending much money individually. If you put in a reasonably high, reasonable Sunday car parking charge, it's then potentially a large percentage of what you might buy. And of course, a lot of people go to car boot sales and don't buy anything at all. They're on spec, and then they see what they find, and maybe they find it interesting. So I think it would be a mistake to Councillor Bryan to underestimate the impact it would actually have on those car boot sales and how much money they raise. And as I say, they're a very important part of raising funds for local charities, which I feel could really be threatened by this.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. Yeah, and your point isn't lost, and you addressed the issues earlier very eloquently. I don't have anybody else to speak in the chat bar, and I'm not going to sum up all the points that were raised because the members have raised some extremely good points to put forward through to Cabinet. I will take one point that was made about by Councillor Canning about a holistic approach being done at a later date in terms of all car parking in Dorset. And I think that is a realistic approach to take. We will go through to phase 2, but with car parking charging, as easily as car parking charging can be put up, it can also be brought down again, that the charges can be reduced again. So I think that going forward, I think the council, from some of the points that have been made, I think the members would feel that there needs to be a holistic approach at some point in the future concerning car parking and the whole issue of car parking right across Dorset. I don't think one size fits all. I know that there's a mind to create different levels of car parking. I know that it is a view of the portfolio holder, and I believe the officers, that they would like to see car parking addressed in the future with a residential level of car parking charge and a tourist level of car parking charge, and quite how that's going to work I'm not sure, but I know that's an aspiration that they would like to get to if possible. So been about an hour into this, members, so if there's nobody else would like to make a comment, I will just ask the portfolio holder and the officer director for place if they would like to make any last comment, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. So Mr. Selgren, is there anything you'd like to wish?
Chairman, thank you. Just to thank you and the committee for those very thoughtful, thought-provoking comments. I will be discussing those with the portfolio holder after this meeting in preparation for this report coming to Cabinet later in the month.
Thank you. Councillor Bryan, is there anything you wish to add at this point before I close this agenda item?
No, I just want to thank everybody for their input, and just to put Councillor Canning's mind at rest, we've already added to the discussion we're having after this meeting the subject of how we deal with car boot sales. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Canning, because it is important. This is the reason for these types of get-togethers, so we get the views against a report that is about to be submitted to Cabinet, and if necessary, we can tweak the report accordingly during the Cabinet meeting. And that's about all I've got to say. But I appreciate all the input from all the members.
Thank you, and thank you, members. That was a good debate. Thank you so much.
Chairman, sorry, Chairman, it's Jonathan Mayer. You did have a question for me.
Yep.
About charging. What I'm conscious I've got in front of me is a report from the external auditors to one of the predecessor councils who dealt with exactly the issue that I've raised, where they were concerned that in one of the predecessor councils, off-street car parking charges were being used in quite an unsophisticated way, just as a means of raising revenue. That's absolutely what we're not doing here. This is about taking a more holistic approach to managing traffic, which has the beneficial side effect of raising money that we can invest in managing traffic and how people move effectively. One of the benefits of a scrutiny meeting like this is that we identify areas that we need to put a little bit more concentration on into reports before they go into cabinet. So that's something that I can build on in the existing report and add a little bit more about the context in which local authorities are entitled to charge. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think without wishing to open a can of worms here, I think there was an acceptance amongst members, because certainly there's nothing else arrived in the chat bar, that there is obviously a need to provide that level of service on our highways in terms of the pothole filling, the gully clearing and the gritting as we go into those winter months, because we do as an authority have a responsibility for that. And obviously, as everyone appreciates, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that has drastically and significantly hit the budgets of this council. So members are okay. So officers, you've heard the comments from the members of the committee, and those comments will be taken through to cabinet now for the cabinet on the 8th of December. Okay, so I'm going to move to agenda item 6, Transforming Cities Fund, and a review of the cabinet decision on the 5th of November 2019. So it's for us to look at this decision that was made and to have an overview of it and see how it's progressing. And I think is it Mr. Piles to report, is it?
No, Mr. Chairman, it's Jack Wiltshire, Head of Highways, is going to make the report.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Jack.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Chair, for the introduction. Just to set the context for this report, I'd like to share a vision for our Transforming Cities Fund work. So this is to create an environment where sustainable travel becomes the obvious transport choice for local journeys, enabling safer journeys to schools, building fairer and easier access to jobs, businesses and activities, tackling inequality and enabling economic growth and prosperity in the South East Dorset region as part of our action plan to address the climate and ecological emergency. So to summarise the key events that have brought us to this current position, in June 2019, we submitted a joint bids application with BCP Council to the Department for Transport. This was accepted and we were asked to work up more detailed proposals. Originally, we weren't in the running for the award, but the National TCF programme extended the 10 areas to 12 areas and we were included in the final 2. In March 2020, along with BCP Council, our bid was awarded £79 million by the government under their Transforming Cities Fund scheme. This funding means that we can invest in the largest sustainable travel programme of change to transport infrastructure ever seen in the area. This will transform local travel options and connect local people to local jobs and education. The £79 million of external funding has to be spent over a 4-year period. In May 2020, Cabinet approved a 3-year delivery programme already set and approved by Department for Transport in the strategic outline business case. Cabinet also approved delegated authority to deliver the programme and for scrutiny to be provided through a regular update to Council Governance Board, which I'll call here the CGB. The CGB members from Dorset Council are Councillor Ray Bryan, Councillor Mike Parks, Councillor Rod Adkins and myself. This delegated authority most importantly relates to decisions on spend within the overall £79 million budget, as key scheme elements will frequently exceed a key decision value of £500,000, which would require Cabinet approval were there to be no delegation. Today's report asks for your support on 4 key points. Point A is the delivery of the proposed 3-year programme in line with the TCF strategic outline business case, which has already been approved by Cabinet, and also the guidance set out by the DFT in the insurance framework. Point B is the agreed governance framework and the delegation of the authority to the Head of Highways in consultation with a portfolio holder for Highways, Travel and Environment through the TCF Governance Board for the approval of future TCF proposals, detailed programme delivery decisions and the detailed design of each element of the programme. Point C is that regular TCF update reports will go to the CGB and from there to the DFT as stipulated in point 8 of the award letter from DfT, with consideration of traffic regulation orders associated with the programme being considered in line with Dorset Council's approvals. And point D is continued joint working with BCP council officers and councillors on the TCF and other linked transport programmes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members. Is there any questions from members? Nothing in the chat. Oh, Councillor Toke.
Thanks, Chair. Very briefly, the award is for South East Dorset City Region brackets Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. Do we know, or could you tell us, we clearly know, which areas of Dorset Council are also included within that South East Dorset City Region? And given that the local plan proposals are looking to put 3,000 more houses in Alderholt, would Alderholt be included in that area should those houses become part of the actual local plan?
Would Officer like to respond?
Thank you, Councillor Took. Yes, so what this report is doing is working on 2 previous reports which have already been to Cabinet. 2 previous reports that sets out the actual governance of the group and also the strategic programme. So in that we're showing the main schemes that we want to deliver over the next 4 years, and that shows exactly where those routes would go. What it doesn't show is the detailed level because that design hasn't taken place yet. So we already have the Cabinet approval to say that we want to work in these particular improvement corridors, which I'm happy to go through separately if you would like me to, and essentially allow the delegated decision process to go to the CGB to say, okay, Cabinet have said we want to deliver this programme which is affecting these areas, but these are the delegated authorities to say that you can spend this particular amount on these routes. But in broad summary, the areas outside of the BCP conurbation stretch from starting at Wareham, going across to Wimborne and then up to Ferndown to provide main travel corridors to get into and out of that conurbation area.
Okay.
Okay, may I come back for a moment, Chairman?
Certainly, Councillor Toke.
Just briefly, the other point in terms of the local plan proposals, if the larger option for Alderholt goes through, that will make Alderholt larger than Shaftesbury currently is. So there'll be something like 4,200 houses in Alderholt. As local people will know, the transport infrastructure around about runs through Hampshire and possibly Wiltshire, but it is C-class roads. So if there's money for improving transport infrastructure, that has to be important in context. If we get, instead of Alderholt as a village, we get Alderholt as a town larger than Shaftesbury. And I'd just like to know if that money would be available for assisting with that infrastructure, should that, in my view, inappropriate 3,000 houses become part of the local plan. Thank you.
Okay, so in response to that particular question, the money which has been allocated here has to be allocated to the projects which have already been identified. The Transforming Cities Fund work and the infrastructure associated with it are predominantly for enabling more sustainable travel choices. So the biggest focus is around how can you walk and cycle more safely, how can you commute safely if you're preferring to use active travel options, and also looking at a public transport. So it's not to do with building new roads for infrastructure, it's to do with having better connectivity linked to sustainable transport options. The local plan is probably outside of the context of this particular report, but obviously we'd be looking at that separately, and that's where we have our local transport plan and our LTP funding to address infrastructure issues.
Okay.
Okay, I take it from that the answer is probably not, but to be decided. Is that fair?
If it would be helpful, I'll be quite happy to go through the previous council reports to show exactly where the scheme routes are. in this environment, I can't just show my screen and show where the lines are, but from a very quick look at the plan from the November 2019 Cabinet report, that will show where the current travel routes are.
Okay, maybe we can do that offline somewhere later.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Really great to see this substantial active travel investment in the BCP wider region, as it were. I come from Weymouth. I'm going to ask the obvious question. Is there any sign of a transforming larger towns fund?
Officer?
I think that's probably feeding into discussions we're having more at a subnational level. So that's where I'm working with subnational transportation bodies to say how can we get fairer funding, how can we get the devolution side of things. And I think that was probably covered in the recent financial updates from central government saying that they want to have further investment in infrastructure. Whether or not a separate Transforming Cities Fund, and we recognise that BCP is not a city, as neither is Dorset, so it's actually a delivery mechanism rather than anything else, has been successful for that particular case that we put forward. But yes, I certainly agree that I'll be lobbying for fairer and a levelling up of funding for Dorset so that we can have more improved infrastructure in our other towns.
Thank you. I think, Councillor Heatley, that's a perfectly fair question to ask. I suspect that it won't be lost on the leader of the council, who no doubt will be lobbying with MPs to get a fairer funding deal for Dorset, as he continually tries to do. Did you have anything else, Councillor Heatley?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think this is obviously a really good opportunity for Dorset to finally get some funding from central government to put some infrastructure in, and it's just I just wanted to have an assurance while we've got the officers here that the ward members will be kept fully informed of the process as the individual projects take place, and will receive the necessary briefings on it. Now, I know I have up to date. We have had a discussion with officers about some of the new travel corridors that are being put in, and I just wondered whether or not it would also be possible to be a witness in the CGB, the Council of Governance board meetings when they meet as well. Is that possible or not?
Well, certainly the first point about consultation, yes, we're specifically set up to make sure we have the right levels of consultation, and we clearly want to engage with all the relevant stakeholders. Regarding the CGB, that's something I can take forward to them. I think we're actually currently sitting at the moment, but it wouldn't necessarily be my decision because obviously it's a joint group. But yeah, I'd be quite happy to raise that at the next group meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got Councillor Bryan, portfolio holder, to speak.
Yes, business comes under me as well. Thank you, Chairman. And well done for putting this forward, Jack. You've done extremely well getting the message across. I think most people will see this as a very positive way forward, but can we just consider it as being the start? Because I think that's the important issue. I am desperate to make sure that there are other areas, such as Weymouth, such as Dorchester, where we look at opportunities for safer travel, either via bike or walking. So can we just say that this is the start? And I'll be working with obviously John, Matthew and Jack and the team to make sure that where any bid becomes any grant money becomes available, that we get to the front of the queue. We're quite good at it at the moment, and I don't intend to let that relax. So if members can please be assured that that this is the start, as I say, not the final lap.
Okay,
thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. That was good to hear. Councillor Parry, I do apologise. I didn't ask members if they want to speak before I went into this agenda item. Councillor Parry, would you like to just make a quick comment now? Portfolio holder.
And I know it's rare for me to speak on matters not directly about children's services, but as a ward member in West Parley, and I know your own Wimborne ward. We are the apron of the BCD area, and we have seen the importance of having that connectivity in and out of it. And if we look at some of the big projects that have been undertaken in recent times, for example, the cycle lane down Ham Lane from Coal Hill down to Longham, and the continuing development of that. You know, I do want to speak in support of this because we have a number of cycle areas and footpath areas, as well as certain roads, but those areas where the improvements that have been put in place are very significant, but it is joining them up with the bigger network to ensure that you really have got that ability to connect one town with another on foot or by bike, rather than purely being left with the option of resorting to taking your car out every day. And so what I want to understand from Jack is what further political support he requires from us as ward councillors in the area to accelerate this work, or for him to be able, and his team, to be able to get even more funding in place, that even bigger improvements can happen going forward.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor Parry. Councillor Wiltshire, would you like to respond, please?
I one day I might be a councillor, but currently I'm still an officer. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. I haven't offended you.
No, certainly not. But yes, in response to Councillor Parry's question, yes, obviously, again, we want to continue to be involved with the stakeholders, and thank you for your support there. I think it probably is looking at the wider issues. So we've got this funding set for a 4-year period, and we need to work with all the stakeholders to make sure we deliver that as effectively as we can. So the stages we're in at the moment, essentially we're in a pre-delivery stage. So the designs are continuing at the moment. We're getting the input, we're getting consultation to see what are the best ways to improve these corridors, and input from all councillors would be very helpful on that. Then I suppose going to the second point about the wider connectivity, but that's really going to further things like the second or the refresh of our local transport plan, so we can see what our long-term strategic proposals are for Dorset more as a whole, rather than concentrating on the South East Dorset area, because we've got this central funding.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I reminded that I didn't ask if there was any members that were actually attending this meeting, so they wanted to speak before this agenda item, so I just put it there now. I'm having IT issues and have to nurse my computer through this meeting. So was there any other members that wish to speak that aren't on the committee? No? Okay. So moving on then, I've got nobody else in the chat bar. I've got another question, Mr. Wiltshire, if that's okay. And that is around the fact that we're looking at a £79 million spend over 4 years, and we're going to get regular updates, please, with the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Expectation is over a 3-year delivery programme. So will that be okay to have those regular updates coming before this committee?
Certainly, quite happy to.
Thank you. And the other thing was that there is a on page 43 at 2.1, the table there in terms of the funding, the funding hasn't been front loaded, and I've just wondered that in light of the significant budget restraints that we've now got on Dorset Council, is this going to hinder the rollout programme over that? We're expected to do it in 3 years, not the 4, as I understand from the report. Is there a risk at all that we're not going to be able to complete what it is we're setting out to do due to that not being front loaded and the funding coming in the later years? Or will we be on track to complete the project?
Yeah, so in response to a couple of points there, then, the funding, as made clear, is externally funded. So internal revenue issues for Dorset Council won't affect this. Obviously, we're looking to deliver a balanced budget anyway. So because it's DFT funding, it's already set. This is the funding we will get going forward, and it's been put into these different stages because that's the timeline that we can actually deliver it in accordance with. And that's what has been previously agreed, or the programme for that has been previously agreed by Cabinet. So yes, I'm confident that it's deliverable. I am talking on Dorset Council's behalf rather than BCP's behalf, but we're working very closely and we have a joint team set up to make sure that it is deliverable. And we don't sort of just stop on the border. Obviously, we've got a joined up approach to making sure we have that full connectivity. Yeah.
Okay, you're going to take me to my next point in a minute. But in terms of that's not being front loaded, then we're fine with that. That we will have the ability to complete those projects, whether there'll be sufficient funding to do it. I was worried about, as I say, any ability to complete that project because we didn't have the money up front. But as you said, we'll be able to complete those projects. So if I go to the last one, and it's a level of risk that exists if BCP aren't able to complete their part of the projects, because I'm given to understand that we have a procurement contract in place that meant we could move very quickly on this, whereas BCP I think haven't moved quite as quickly. So if there is a risk of not being able to complete the project in that joined up way, then could we have that reported back to us significantly early enough so that intervention can be made?
Yes, I'm certainly happy, obviously, to raise any form of risk. I would say that it's a very low risk. So you're quite right in saying that the setup we have for our delivery means that Dorset Council can move with the construction phase very, very swiftly. BCP are looking at their options for their deliverability. One of those is indeed actually using our delivery model. So I think the risk to delivery is or not being delivered is very, very low. It's just determining what that mechanism is for BCP.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Wiltshire. I've got no other members in the chat bar wishing to speak. So can I take it from members that we're happy to support this continuation of this programme? There's no dissent. We're happy to continue with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move to agenda item 7, update on energy procurement, review of the Cabinet decision of the 5th of November 2019. And I think is it Mr. Bishop to give the report, is it?
It was actually Dawn Adams to give the report with Max Bishop supporting me in terms of technical experts. So if I just introduce the report, I'm joined by Max Bishop, who's our energy expert. So he'll be there to explain anything technical you want to explain about the report. The committee requested a progress report on the recommendations agreed by Cabinet on 5th of November 2019 in respect of the procurement of energy supply. The report confirms that recommendations have taken place. We have awarded a 4-year contract for electricity with npower and a 4-year contract with Total for gas, both with flexibility in contract to purchase options and change the purchasing options flexibly annually. You will note that electricity was based on a green tariff for year 1, and a report provides details on what that tariff will entail. The report requests that the committee notes the progress made and will take any questions around the technical side or about the report itself.
Thank you. Okay, do I have any questions from members? Okay, I've got Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. This is a subject in which I've taken some interest, as Councillor Bryan will know from the questions I've asked him. It's good to see this progress. I think I understand why the contract is with one of those green suppliers which proves it's a green supplier by buying certificates of green generation from other suppliers. It's not, to my mind, the ideal solution because you can't really be sure that you're generating additional genuine green supply. And so I'm very interested to see the remark in the paper to the effect that you're going to try and explore some ways of getting a more tangible connection between our electricity supply and it being genuinely renewable. Is it possible to expand a bit on that?
Max, would you be able to explain on that, please?
I don't know if Councillor Bryan would like to answer that, but I know that
in terms of my involvement, we have been there's sort of several ways you can do it. So as you rightly point out, the base level is a REGO-backed, certificate-backed green tariff that has certain arguments about additionality, as you point out, within it. The sort of steps beyond that are utilising what's called power purchase agreements. So you're specifically entering a contractual, you're entering a contract with either another supplier, so that they won't have built the renewable capacity yet, but when you commit to buying it for a certain period into the future, usually a minimum of 15 years, then they will. So that's one method, and critically the laser framework is built with very much to allow that to happen. So that's there. So we've done some initial work just looking at the what the prices might be if we were to do that, and also what demand we might be able to commit, because that's the other thing. You know, obviously you have to commit for a certain period of time, but you have to be sure you will need that demand. So what we want now is going to look very different to what we need in 15 years, because obviously we potentially will be electrifying our heating, we'll be losing buildings across our estate, we'll be gaining electric vehicles. So there's lots of kind of areas to consider. So we've been looking at that. But there's also the possibility of using a power purchase agreement through self-supply. So that is, you could invest in your own large-scale renewables, you know, on say a site somewhere in the county or even elsewhere, and then purchase from yourself through a power purchase agreement. And again, I don't know if Councillor Brown wants to comment on that, but I know we've fed into what that might look like, and looked at the feasibility of that within the framework, and it is very much possible, and I've provided some information to the sustainability team to look at again our demands, our costs, and start to do some financial modelling on that.
Did Councillor Brown want to speak?
Are you calling me in, Chairman?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, unfortunately, I missed part of that conversation. I lost my internet for a few minutes. But can I assure Brian that finding our own power source is something that I am absolutely passionate about. It has to be part of our green agenda. Is it going to happen overnight? Obviously not. But we will be working, and Max has been very good with the sustainability team on working together on this, but it's absolutely imperative that the council become as self-sufficient as they can in the shortest possible time. And it's always sad to see that a power supply that has been generated in Dorset is actually being used elsewhere, but we won't go into that. That was outside of my control, but we will find something for ourselves. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. I had similar issues myself because I lost modern dog cover at the same time as well. Councillor Took, I believe you have a question.
Just a very brief one. Thank you, Chairman. In the report, it mentions the green tariff costs us a little bit more. I don't mind that. I think it's worthwhile, especially in view of our climate change commitments. It also mentions that joining the laser framework has enabled a 15% reduction in gas costs. My question is very simple. What is our gas bill in round terms, and what does that 15% equate to in round terms? Thank you.
Okay, Officer.
I can actually tell you what our spend was last year, which we reported in the Cabinet report, if that's useful.
Yeah,
Max, Yeah, so actually, I can tell you what our spend was last year, which reported in the Cabinet report. We actually have spent 1.4 million on gas and 5.7 on electricity. Can you actually provide that? Is it a figure, Max, on your savings?
Sorry. Yeah, we're in the process of verifying the new pricing. So the contract period has just started. It looks like it's more like 20% savings, having carried out further verifications. Obviously, that will then obviously depend on what we consume, because for actually how that varies throughout the year. But yeah, it's in the region of 20% on that 1.5 million.
So the savings on gas more than offset any extra on the green tariff from npower. Is that fair?
Yeah. Oh yes, definitely. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's not inconsiderable amounts of money that's being spent on energy provision, is it? I noticed in the report with npower for 2019-20, total cost was 2.68 million, which included the street lighting. So obviously it's a really important piece of work to ensure that we're getting the best bang for buck, as it were, from the council. So I think, as I picked up as well as Councillor took the 15% decrease that we've seen, which you said has improved slightly now with this laser purchasing ability that we have, which is proven obviously really good dividends. Just do you see any, obviously it's fluctuations in market, it swings and roundabouts, but do you see any significant risk in terms of energy provision, cost of energy provision rising in cost, or we're happy with the product that we've got in place in terms of that laser funding?
Yeah, I mean I'd say the approach we've got is extremely risk managed, because the way that the contracts work, a standard as opposed to a standard fixed price fixed term contract, you will obviously enter at a fixed time in the marketplace. And then when you leave, you have to procure at that point. So you're only able to secure energy if you use that model at the prices at that time. Now, obviously, the energy market is extremely volatile market. It's known to be extremely volatile. So if you adopt that model, you're kind of you expose yourself to a very high level of risk. Whereas with the contracts that we use, the way they work, you commit to buying for a 4-year period. So we've committed to buying for a 4-year period, and we signed up. Well, we signalled our intentions to sign up back in, the Cabinet decision was back in November. After contract negotiation, we had a 6-month window, and that meant that Laser could buy energy on our behalf 6 months, in that 6 months before our supply period started. So the reason we got such a reduction in gas prices, it so happened we had a huge crash in the energy market because of coronavirus, historical lows because of the lockdowns and lack of consumption and oversupply of oil. And that meant, because we'd committed to buying, Laser could purchase energy on our behalf, a large amount of it for the year ahead, and even for the 3 years ahead after that, remaining on the contract. So they can buy future demand to match future demand. They won't have bought everything, but because it was a historical low, they will have bought a lot, more than they usually do, according to their standard governance rules, because it was so low. And that means that they haven't bought everything, because they can then, if there's any further reductions, they can hopefully buy at those low points as well. But yeah, it's basically in those terms, it's very risk managed, because you're allowing multiple. You can go to the market at multiple times, whereas a standard arrangement, you're subject to only buying at the time when your contract ends. So what we would do if you wish to continue this risk managed approach is in 3 years time we'd look at what we want to do for the next contract period. If it was decided to continue the risk managed approach, you'd then sign up a year ahead, and then that would again give that forward buying window that would manage the risk.
Okay, and in terms of that contract period, there's no break clauses in that. It's you buy in for that period and you're tied to it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's because they have to know that that you're committing to that, so they can go to market with that. What you are allowed to do that is sort of a major benefit of the framework is that you can reduce your consumption significantly because they buy for a large number of public sector organisations. They're what they call baskets. They have a lot of energy within them. So if we reduce our energy consumption, they can absorb that within the whole volume, whereas standard contracts look at a client by client basket, and they would have a standard clause that said if you reduce your consumption by more than 10%, they have the right to charge you for that unused consumption. And now that has got implications for obviously changes to your estate. And also, if we suddenly switch to, for instance, large-scale self-generation, you might be penalised under an alternative contract. So there isn't a break clause in terms of cutting short the contract, but there are flexibilities in terms of reducing volume.
Okay, that's really interesting. No, thank you, Mr. Bishop. Thank you. I've got no other questions from members. So our Item 7, Update Energy Procurement Review of Cabinet Decision of 5th of November 2019, is to note the progress made in respect to the procurement energy supply contracts. If I don't hear any dissent, then I would take it that we're happy with the progress that's been made on this. Okay, members? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll move to, thank you. So I'll move to Agenda Item 8, Property and Strategy and Asset Management Plan. Okay, and I've got Mr. Thompson. Hello again. How are you?
Hi, Councillor Bartlett. I believe it's Councillor Ferrari is actually going to lead on the paper. Actually.
Well, okay, Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Chair. Well, just by way of an intro, this paper represents one of 3 strands that we're having to pull together to deliver the assets outcomes that Dorset needs. That when Dorset was formed, we amalgamated an estate and we didn't have a coherent statement of what our estate was. We've now completed that piece of work, so have an analysed estate that we're aware of. The individual predecessor councils all had the ability in-house to do relatively limited asset transactions. I mean, the odd buy or sell of a piece of property. So what we've had to do since the formation of the council is to strengthen the skill set, and Dave Thompson's being a particular example of that, to bring together the skills we need to deliver what we want to do with assets. The third piece in the jigsaw is the process. And this paper represents the process. Effectively, this allows us to make decisions balancing the needs of the business units and the costs associated with delivering services, and bring them together so that there is a department of the council that is maximising the value and the use of the estate and developing that in line with the needs of the business units. So as I say, this is the third strand, and we will see falling out from this a series of processes that will actually deliver the asset management changes that we want to see over the council over the next few years. So just by way of an introduction, I would welcome comments and from the various members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. So members will understand that we had this before us in scrutiny a little while ago. The officers had to formulate a report very quickly to get it before our scrutiny committee. I've asked for it to come back because in the time that it went before our scrutiny committee to the time it going to cabinet, the officers were then able to bulk out the report and put a lot of the or all of the requests that we had in scrutiny into that report that went before Cabinet. So just so that you have oversight of it again, to give an assurance that what you requested originally to go in, particularly in view of the time frames, the timelines that some of you requested to go into the report, they are there now. Mr. Thompson, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, not at the moment, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, it was an excellent report again. So is there any member that's not on the committee that wishes to speak on this before I move to the committee, before I move into the debate? No? Okay, I've got Councillor Mike Parks to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. I do appreciate this coming back, because I did ask some questions last time. But I'm quite interested with the giving up of the leases in particular, and note that Allenview House is in Wimborne is certainly one of them. And I think I raised previous concerns that we need to keep a customer-facing hub, for want of a better word, in the East Dorset area. So I guess really some assurances of that, but also some of our smaller leases. And I can only again speak for what I know in the East Dorset area, for example, trading standards and the registrars, for example, rent space off Ferndown Town Council at the moment. So I'm wondering whether those sort of smaller ones that perhaps are not the big hitters are also being picked up in this. And I guess a separate question really regarding the disposal of Firs Hill and where we are and where this features in that.
Okay. Did either the officer or the portfolio wish to comment at that point?
I suspect Dave is better equipped to answer some of those more detailed questions.
Yes, so if I pick up the first point about the disposal of some of the leases, clearly that what we're prioritising is the larger leases that have got a significant expenditure. So those are the ones that where there's a natural break point in the lease. So Allenview House, Prince's House, these are ones that are actually effectively we have to trigger those at the break point, which is early part of next year. Beyond that, there are leases also that have actually got breakpoints, which we will address in the following year in 2022. At some point, when we actually look at the full extent of all the different properties that we have and all the different locations that we're in, we will actually then eventually work through the portfolio. But I think it's initially, because of cost pressures and everything else, that we're focusing on those major leases. If I pick up at Firs Hill, basically that has been surplus for a period of time. We do recognise that we've actually marketed that. There has been an approach and offer made, although to the point of exchange or completion on that site, effectively because there were one or two issues surrounding it where part of the land was actually in probate. So until at such time as we actually have that resolved, then we will then move forward in terms of either disposal or development of that particular site.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you for that, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this report is good, and I think it's the progress is to be admired. Appendix 4 on pages 86 to 88 set out some target dates, and I think those are good target dates. As with any project management, it's important, I think, to keep an eye on any potential slippage well in advance. So people the officers need to keep up to date on what's going on and what might arise to hinder completion against target and take potential remedial action. And I would ask if possibly, maybe at least quarterly, we could have a report based around that coming to this committee to say if we're still on target, if there were potential problems, if they had arisen, what action was taken to fix them, or if it's not been possible to fix them, just so we keep a fairly tight grip on progress, because some of these dates, especially in terms of lease breaks, are quite critical. So could the officers accept that, and would that be a good way to go? Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Thompson?
Yes, I'm quite happy to prepare a quarterly report if required.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. In terms of Councillor Took raising some of the timelines in this, at page 86, at the bottom of page 86, you've put a piece in there which is agile working. Just have your description what you think agile working is. Is this hot desking, working from home, this new way of working that we seem to have evolved during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, it's a mixture of that, basically. So obviously that when we start to look at agile working, clearly it's a well-developed concept that's obviously used in a number of other local authorities as well as in the private sector, and I believe that actually now with COVID it's probably accelerated that process, where we've actually been able to demonstrate that people's ability to work remotely and effectively, and as a result of that obviously will have some beneficial impact in terms of the impact on space and how we might actually use space going forward. Obviously one of the key measures that we've looked at previously is the people to desk ratio, and probably as a result of this exercise we've actually been consulting with all our exec directors and senior managers in relation to where they see the way that they're going to work going forward, and the impact in terms of perhaps the amount of space that they will actually require going forward. And as a result of that, we'll be able to factor that into our planning and in relation of how many offices and how much space that we will actually require.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of the timeline, it says by March 2022, and I would suggest that this is quite an important piece of work that needs to be done as quickly as possible. And I dare say part of this work you're going to be dealing with, you're going to be in discussions with HR, Human Resources, because I do have a bit of concern about officer work, and through this COVID pandemic that we've been going through with a lot of the remote working that's going on. I, like many members, will be receiving emails from officers significantly outside of office hours, which is starting to concern me. Obviously, officers working from home are having to fit in their work around family commitments, children commitments. Possibly not, the time management isn't as good as it would be if they were in a structured, more formal arrangement in terms of office working. So that has been a concern of mine as to what potentially risk that presents to the authority going forward. I don't think one size fits all. I probably don't think remote working suits all officers. I think there's been something earlier about a bit of mission creep with officers drifting back into the office again to work. So I just wondered how you felt about that. I do have concerns about this aspect of this agile working and the amount of office retention we will have going forward.
Obviously, Chairman, that will be, these are elements actually being addressed by our colleagues in HR and under the Dorset workplace. Clearly that as a result of COVID, that has an immediate impact where it will, people will actually work more remotely, probably through to the end of March next year, the way it stands at the moment. But actually we are factoring in terms of our plans, people returning into the office, but maybe not on the same basis. So therefore, probably that people might work 3 days a week or something of that nature. So we're planning a sort of 5 to 10 desk to person ratio going forward, because we do believe that there will be a return at some time in the new year, but not to the extent of actually we will require the same level of space. And obviously, you know, this is an issue that's not just being addressed by us, but it's also being addressed by a number of organisations, both in terms of the culture, the well-being of staff, and you know, and their mental well-being in terms of not everyone can work from home, not everyone wants to work from home, and not everyone wants to work 5 days a week in the office as well. So, you know, all of those factors are taken into account. and actually our office planning and the work that we've actually done with senior management is actually factoring in a reduction in the deaths to people ratio, but actually it's not dropping to the point of where it's always going to be 0.
Okay, right, thank you. Got nobody else in the chat bar to speak. Mr. Thompson, could I just raise an issue that you and I spoke with outside the meeting, and I think you were going to get the figures for me, in terms of the hotels in the report listed as 61 in the scrutiny report. Originally it was 61, and in this report it's 62 in terms of the assets. And
Yes.
Also farms in this report, I think it's listed as 53, but in the scrutiny one it was 48. And I think we had a conversation about establishing the true figure there just for clarity.
Yeah, so I can actually clarify, Chairman, we have 62 hotels that we physically own, and that basically our farm estate is actually a mix of farms and actual land holdings, which we've actually included within that number. So it is 53 farms and land holdings associated with the estate. So 41 actual farms and 12 land holdings.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. And I think my final point would be just, as was already picked up on, about this coming back regularly to scrutiny. So perhaps on some dashboard monitoring in terms of quarterly review, or if there's any significant change within the methodology, or sorry, in terms of the disposing or repurposing or selling of assets that they're brought to the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee for an overview of that. Okay.
Certainly, Chairman. I mean, as we've actually highlighted both in this report, that any major decisions, particularly major disposals or redevelopments, they would probably form major decisions that would need to go through the normal governance processes.
Yeah, and I think we'll have on top of that, we'll have a quarterly report. It would be good. Okay, I've got no other members that wish to speak, so it was just to review the report, because as you did a really good job of taking on board what we said in the scrutiny in a very quick period of time when you wrote that report for us, and in an even quicker period of time you managed to bulk out the report to take our views to Cabinet, so I'm really grateful for that, Mr. Thompson. Okay, so thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, members, so if members are happy, I'm going to move to agenda item 9, the annual complaints report for 2019-20. And we're asked to support the focus on working with services to ensure greater organisational learning from complaints, and to recognise the savings associated with the informal resolution, mediation and relationship building. Also to note the sharp increase in complaints in the 2020-21 report for Q2 and understand the likely reasons for this increase. Celebrate the increase in the compliments in 2020-21 report for Q1, and to note the complaints performance for the financial year 2019-20 as set out in the annual report. So I just don't make a note here that the report's been presented to People, Health and Scrutiny, so we don't need to look at those particular aspects of that complaint process because they've already dealt with that. So in terms of the lead officer, is it Mr. Eyre to report, is it?
It is indeed. Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. I've got a very brief introduction. So I'm Mark Eyre, and I'm the service manager for assurance, and that includes sort of a remit for complaints, emergency planning, risk, information governance, and a number of other things. But today, obviously, here to present the complaints report. Ordinarily, our complaints manager Tony Bygrave would present this for you. Unfortunately, because the meeting was rearranged, it's clashed with his leave. So unfortunately, you've got to put up with my presentation instead. But
okay.
This is the second complaints report that's been presented to the committee. And assuming the committee are happy to receive it, we will provide quarterly updates moving forward. Whilst it's headed up as the annual complaints report for 2019-20, we probably would agree that it's better to focus on the most recent complaints performance. And these are set out in for place within Appendix A of the report. The annual report itself provides very much a whole council view on the last financial year, and as you mentioned, Chair, it's been presented to both of the scrutiny committees. For your information, it's a statutory requirement, that annual report, in terms of social care complaints, not so much for other complaints, but I think hopefully it's helpful for you to have an overview of the position. I think it's fair to say there've been quite a significant number of changes with regards to how complaints are managed since the formation of the assurance service, and hopefully you'll see some positive messages within the reports that are presented to you today. We're working very hard to promote informal resolution and seeking common sense outcomes rather than escalation to more formal complaints processes. There are, though, as you'll see from the figures, some occasions where this cannot be achieved, and in some cases there'll be associated behaviours where really it does benefit from a greater level of formality to complaint management. If I could refer you to that Appendix A and the performance of complaints across the Police Directorate during Q1 and Q2 of this financial year. The COVID response has had a clear impact here. In the early stages of the pandemic, the local government ombudsman closed their doors to new complaints, and our own team was reduced in size to provide additional capacity to frontline support in terms of calls to vulnerable people. As you'll see, particularly in complaints for Q2, there has been an increase, and this is actually mirrored across all of the council directorates. Now, in terms of the reasonings for that, I think it could well be that people have found themselves with perhaps a bit more time, with more people not working, so a bit more time to complain, and also there's been some extra scrutiny of services, and that includes across things like highways, waste, planning, and also a number relating to actions of neighbours. One of the reassurance I wanted to give you really today, though, was just to assure you that figure doesn't mean that the council stopped doing a good job, and I think that's reflected in the fact that the justified complaint levels remain low, and that there have been no negative ombudsman judgments. We also continue to receive a good number of compliments, and as I reflected on last time when I attended the committee, I think it's probably fair to say that many compliments received by the council don't actually find their way to the complaints team. I mean, I guess to a certain extent, the team name is probably a bit counterintuitive in that respect, as it is the complaints team, but that's something that we're working on to improve further. So despite those large increase in Q2 complaints, the timescales are still largely being met, and that's despite some of the challenges that COVID has had, not just on the complaints team, but within the service areas of itself. One of the real focuses of the assurance service more generally, and certainly within the complaints team, is to embed a culture of organisational learning. I think the figures presented in front of you today show that that's suffered a little bit during COVID due to some of the service pressures that the staff have had, but the pre-COVID annual report demonstrates a real improvement in levels of learnings achieved. There's also been an increase again in Q2, and that's something that we'll be looking to focus on further as we move forward. So that's really a quick run through the paper, but I'm happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, do I have anybody wishes to speak? No, okay. So, Councillor Took.
Just to say, I think this has been a very good report, and regardless of the figures on screen, I think things seem to be going the right way. I've spent a lot of my career running help and support services in the commercial IT sector, and I understand very well that handling complaints can be very stressful for staff. I'd like to extend my appreciation for the efforts of the team and acknowledge that 4 of the team have required support via the Steps to Wellbeing programme. And I'm wondering if there is anything more we could or should put in place to help staff who are at the sharp end of what is difficult. When you're dealing with complaints, people tend to be a little unreasonable. They tend to be very difficult to deal with. They have a very, they're complaining because they're unhappy, and it's very stressful to deal with that. And I think the more we can do to support our staff, then the better they can respond to those complaints, and the better the outcome will be moving forwards all round.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Took. Would the officer like to comment?
No, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Took. No, really appreciate the comments in terms of the complaints team, and certainly the well-being of that team is clearly top of my focus. And I think actually thinking about the environment we've been in with a lot more of the working from home during the COVID outbreak, that does become quite challenging for areas like the complaints team, because essentially it is a little bit like inviting some of these complainants into your own household. But as a team, we keep a clear eye out on the well-being, and yeah, certainly it's a real clear focus for myself as a service manager. Thank you.
Just to mention on working from home, it can be very isolating working from home. If you're dealing with complaints and you're in a stressful environment, having a team that you work with, where you have people that can put the metaphorical arm around you and help support you when you've just had a very challenging conversation, is quite important. And I'm just wondering if there's something we can do to help that team work more closely together, unless of course they're working very closely together at the moment. But it's challenging working from home when you're in an environment dealing with people who are being critical of you.
Yeah. Does the officer like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, thanks, Councillor Took. Yeah, certainly at the moment, whilst they're not physically working together, we do have daily catch-ups with each of those team members, just to make sure that there is that opportunity to catch up, talk through complaints, and just more generally just the opportunity to share some of that burden. To be fair, I think once we're out of the COVID environment and into some of the new ways of working, that's certainly something that we will be taking on board to look at how we best provide that facility for those complaints team members to actually get together and get that support from each other.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. I've got Mr. Selgren to speak next.
Chairman, thank you for that. But I can see Mr. Mayor's also got his hand up. I suspect he's going to give what I would wish to give, which is an SLT perspective on the important issue that Councillor Took's raised. So with your approval, can I withdraw and offer Mr. Mayor the opportunity to comment?
Well, certainly, I'm happy to hear what you've got to say as well, John.
I'll follow Jonathan then, Chairman, with your approval.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
But Chairman, I wasn't so much going to give the SLT perspective, so perhaps John can give that. I was going to say, as the director responsible for the area in which the complaints team sits, I'm really grateful for the comments from Councillor David Took. Really grateful on behalf of the team, and I'll certainly follow up those concerns with Mark outside the meeting, because it is very difficult when your home is your working environment, and then perhaps some of the more challenging and difficult complainants that we deal with are then effectively brought into people's homes, and that's really hard. What I think I particularly took out of the comments, David's comments, was that I don't necessarily always appreciate and understand the professional background that some of our members have, and the particular experience that you bring to something like complaints. And I had no idea of the areas in which David had previously worked, and those comments were really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's always quite surprising the level of skills there are across the chamber. Yeah, it is. Mr. Selgren.
Thank you, Chairman. So again, if I just thank Councillor Took, as Jonathan did, for those kind thoughts. I know that's been shared by many members. Our staff have been hugely encouraged by the support you've given to us through this very challenging period. Just to reflect that broader point, and Jonathan will obviously deal with the matter within his own directorate, but SLT are monitoring the situation very, very closely, because we've got colleagues in a number of areas of the council's work of that nature. Complaints is one of those teams, but often in areas like social work. Similarly, we have colleagues who are facing that same kind of challenge, where because of working from home, that the balance between the workplace and home place is becoming narrowed, and that creates an additional tension over and above that which COVID does for all of us working under this situation. So, Chairman, I just want to give members the reassurance that from the Chief Executive outwards, we're all very closely involved in this matter, and I say we continue to value the support that members give us in supporting our staff through what are very, very challenging times. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm going to, members will indulge me, I'm going to highlight some of the key messages that come out in this report. So the 722 complaints across the directorates in 2019-20. Of these, 358 were considered through the formal process. 364 have been resolved informally with the complaints team working with operational managers towards more agreeable outcomes with less undue process. And of the 34 ombudsman investigations, only 4 cases refilled manual administration, 3 in adult services and 1 in place, at a cost of the council of £1,800. In 2018-19, the bill to the council was £14,416. So I think really that the team need to have a pat on the back. I think they've done really well. I think moving from where we were to where we are now, and that much of the issues are resolved in-house. Obviously, there's been extensive training that's gone on to bring the team up to this level that they're able to do this sort of work. I think looking at quarter 2 with the complaints that have come in, we have that blip with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has created this issue for us. But and it's always easy, isn't it, for people to complain? It's more difficult for people to say thank you. And I think when you actually we consider the level of compliments that have come in on top of that during that first quarter, second quarter, 117 to 92, I think the team have done really well. I'm really pleased with that. I'm not as concerned about the level of the complaints for that second quarter. I think this is a blip that we're finding that's in COVID-19. I don't know if anybody else wishes to comment. I'm not seeing anything in the chat bar. Okay, so if members are happy to move on, then I think we can move on to the next agenda item. And if members are happy to note the report, and we'll have these coming back to us on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm happy to move on to the next agenda item, which is the Draft Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee Forward Plan. Okay, and this is for a review by the committee of what we've looked at and what's going to be coming in the future. So, Lindsay, did you want to make any comment at this point?
Chairman, just to say, obviously your next meeting is on the 11th of December, where you're focusing solely on review of the budget proposal. So that's 11th of December. After that, we have items that have been identified by the committee, but are just awaiting clarification in terms of timescales. You mentioned about complaints data. That's going to form part of some service performance reporting, which will come to this committee on a regular basis. We are just finalising the timetable for that, and then they will be put into your work plan. There are issues sort of left over from the previous scrutiny committees, which sit on your work plan for consideration as to whether or not any of those will be brought forward. And I think there is work for the committee to do in looking at the work programme moving forward in terms of populating it for the future meetings. And I think we will be discussing that shortly. Yeah,
so we'll discuss that after the meeting. So as we're going to have that discussion post-meet, and I'm happy to move on to the next agenda item, 11, Cabinet Forward Plan. Okay. So in terms of what Cabinet have looked at and what we can ask to come back to us to have a look at, that's laid out in the Cabinet Forward Plan, which members can look at and request to have something come back to the Scrutiny Committee should they feel the need to arise. Okay, which again we would have a discussion around that after this meeting. Okay, so I'm happy to move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 12, and there's no urgent items. And agenda item 13, exempt business, which there is none. So as I've already alluded to, being as we are a new committee, I would like to have a discussion, informal discussion with the committee members, portfolio holders if they wish to stay, and officers if they wish to stay, concerning the populating of the forward agendas of the Scrutiny Committee. So if you could please stay within the meeting, and the officers will disconnect us from the live feed. Okay, thank you. And I'll close the meeting at 12:24. Thank you.